Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. Tonight, we follow the trail into the brownstone of Nero Wolfe, where an uninvited visitor arrives, a striking woman who cannot remember her own name yet claims her life is in peril. A torn playbill, a bitter green bottle, and whispers behind the curtain led to a web of ambition and betrayal where memory itself becomes the stage. Tell me, are you listening late at night or during your morning tea? If mysteries cloaked in shadow intrigue you, like this video and subscribe to join the investigation. Pour yourself something warm, draw the curtains close, and let's uncover the truth. I was halfway through buttering my second slice of Fritz's rye bread when the doorbell announced it had ambitions of an encore. A chime at that hour, 10:30 in the morning, wasn't exactly unheard of at the brownstone, but it had the wrong tempo. We weren't expecting the milkman, and Kramer doesn't waste his free insults before lunch. I set the knife down, wiped my fingers on the napkin Fritz insists on ironing, and headed for the front door. Wolfe was upstairs communing with his orchids, and that meant I was the poor sap drafted for gate duty. When I opened the door, the visitor almost toppled inside with the momentum of her knock. She was tall, striking in the way a flame is when you notice it's licking too close to the curtains, and she carried a handbag big enough to smuggle in a bowling trophy. The only thing missing was her name. I don't mean I forgot it. She did. Please, she gasped, clinging to the door frame as if it were the last streetcar out of Manhattan. I don't know who I am. Now, I've had dames collapse into my arms before, but not usually after introducing themselves as nobody. Well, I said, catching her before she dented the parquet. That's one way to avoid alimony claims. She didn't laugh, which was discouraging. Her eyes darted past me, scanning the hall like she half expected a firing squad. Is Mr. Wolfe? She stopped, shut her eyes, then opened them with the kind of desperation usually reserved for last acts. I need help. That line usually costs $20 an hour with Saul Panzer, but this was my beat. I guided her to the office, which she entered with all the grace of a cat tossed onto a chessboard. Wolfe was back from the orchids earlier than I expected, lowering himself into the big chair like a mountain range deciding where to land. He glanced at her, then at me, then at the breadcrumb I'd smuggled in on my tie. Archie, he said, explain. I waved toward our guest. She claims she left her name in her other purse. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, the way a man does when reminded that civilization has failed. Madam, he rumbled, if you have mislaid your identity, I cannot conjure it from ether. You may begin with what you recall, the lady perched on the red leather chair, as if it might bite her. I woke up in a taxi, she said, voice trembling. No wallet, no papers, nothing. The driver left me at your address after I found it scribbled on the back of a playbill in my bag. I don't know why I had it, or who wrote it. I leaned forward. A playbill. For what show? She pressed her temples, trying to squeeze the memory out like toothpaste. That's the worst part. The title's gone. Everything's gone except... She fumbled in her oversized bag and pulled out a single item, a torn corner of glossy paper with only 2 words visible. Golden Curtain. That's either a melodrama, I said, or a bar uptown with questionable plumbing. Her eyes flashed. Fear, not humor. Please, Mr. Wolfe. Someone followed me, I think. They want me dead. That did it. Up until then, Wolfe had been frowning at the intrusion the way he frowns at garden slugs, but mentioned potential murder within earshot of his chair and the air changes. He shifted, which for him was equivalent to me sprinting a mile. Archie, he said, summon Fritz. The lady requires refreshment, and fetch that fragment here. She handed me the torn paper and I passed it over. Wolfe pinched it delicately, studied the print, then let it drop onto the blotter like a dead moth. Madame, your plea is extravagant. You expect me to accept that you exist absent identity, memory, or provenance. Yet you come here, of all places." He leaned back, eyes half shut. "Why?" Her voice cracked. Because you're Nero Wolfe, and if I don't find out who I am, I'll be dead before nightfall." Now, I'm not one to melt at sob stories, but the way she said it made the hair on my arms file a police report. Before Wolfe could dismiss her with one of his patented snorts, the phone rang. I crossed to the stand, picked it up, and said my usual cheerful, "Nero Wolfe's residence." A man's voice growled, low and urgent. "Keep her there. Don't let her leave, or you'll both regret it." Click. I looked at the receiver, then at Wolfe, then at our guest. She was as white as Fritz's best linen. "Who was it?" Wolfe demanded. "Somebody who doesn't want her wandering off." And I doubt he meant regret in the crossword puzzle sense. Wolfe opened his eyes fully, like shutters raised to daylight. "Confound it. Very well. Madame, you may remain until we ascertain your circumstances. Archie, secure the doors. We are, it seems, involuntarily engaged." That was as close to enthusiasm as Wolfe gets before dinner. I locked the front and checked the back, wondering if we were protecting a damsel in distress or a dynamite stick with legs. When I returned, she was sipping Fritz's chamomile like it might carry answers. "Your name," Wolfe said firmly, "is our first necessity. Without it, we cannot proceed." She shook her head, eyes brimming. "I told you, I don't remember." Nothing. Just the curtain I leaned against the desk. "Lady, curtains come in all colors. Golden ones usually fall on the leading lady. Are you telling us you're an actress?" The word seemed to jolt her. She blinked rapidly, set the cup down with a clatter. Yes, I think so. I was on stage. Lights, applause. But then, darkness. Fear. Wolfe's lips twitched, not quite a smile. An actress who has forgotten her name. How theatrical. Not forgotten, she burst out, gripping the chair arms. It was taken from me. Like everything else. The room went still enough to hear Fritz in the kitchen polishing gilt out of a saucepan. And that's when the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't timid. It was a fist hammering for entry, shaking the old brownstone like a jury demanding a verdict. I shot Wolfe a look. He shut his eyes, sighed through his nose, and said, "Archie." See who dares I went, wishing I'd packed more rye bread, because something told me breakfast was officially cancelled. When I opened the door, the man outside didn't waste time on greetings. He shoved a badge in my face. Police, though not Kramer's. "I'm Lieutenant Rizzi," he barked. "We're looking for a missing woman." Blonde, 30, answers to... He stopped, peered past me into the hall, and stiffened like a hunting dog catching scent. I didn't have to ask who he meant. Our nameless actress had just been promoted from problem to prize, and the way Rizzi's hand hovered near his holster told me this curtain was about to rise on Act 2, whether Wolfe liked it or not. Lieutenant Rizzi didn't waste time enjoying the architectural beauty of the brownstone. He stepped over the threshold like he owned the mortgage and let his eyes dart straight toward the office door. His jaw worked as if he had a habit of chewing on the last word spoken in the room, and his hand stayed close enough to his sidearm that I wondered if he and the actress were on first-name terms after all. I blocked the hallway with my best imitation of a casual stance. "Morning, Lieutenant. You've got good timing. We were just deciding whether to put another pot of coffee on. What's the official occasion?" "None of your chatter, Goodwin," he snapped. He didn't ask who I was. He knew. That meant he'd done at least one thing right this morning. "Where is she?" "Now hold on," I said, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe. "You can't just barge into a man's home, point at his furniture, and call roll like it's the precinct canteen. Who exactly are you looking for?" His nostrils flared. "A woman, 30, blonde. She's a missing person, and potentially a witness. Her safety's at risk." "Then you should be glad she's someplace comfortable," I said. But before you start rearranging our chairs, you might want to show more than a badge. Paperwork, maybe. A warrant's the fashionable accessory these days. The stare he gave me could have peeled wallpaper. But before he could escalate from glare to growl, Wolfe's voice floated from the office, deep and composed. Archie, invite the lieutenant in before his indignation compels him to splinter the woodwork. It was imported. Oak Rizzy brushed past me and entered the office. Our nameless guest stiffened when she saw him, her fingers tightening around the teacup Fritz had graciously supplied. Rizzy froze too, but it wasn't relief that tightened his shoulders. It was something sharper. "There you are," he said. Not warm, not gentle. More like a man spotting a fugitive than a missing lamb. She recoiled. "I don't know you," she whispered. "Yes, you do," he shot back. "And you're coming with me." Wolfe had had enough. He shifted in his chair with the deliberate dignity of a sultan repositioning his throne. "Lieutenant, kindly moderate your tone. This woman is my guest, and until her circumstances are established, she remains under my protection." Rizzy's jaw tightened. "She's a witness in an active investigation." "Then by all means," Wolfe said. "State the case. Present your authorization, and I will decide if her presence here constitutes obstruction. Until then, you're trespassing on courtesy. I'd seen cops face down mobsters, but watching Wolfe apply his brand of immovable logic could have made a saint sweat." Rizzy's fingers twitched near his holster again, then withdrew. He reached inside his jacket, pulled a folded sheet, and slapped it on Wolfe's desk. "That's the bolo. Her name is Marjorie Keene. Actress. Starred in The Golden Curtain until she vanished 2 nights ago after the final curtain call." At the name, she gasped. Her hand flew to her lips. "Marjorie, yes, that's me." The relief in her voice was real, but it only deepened the worry lines etched into her forehead. "But why don't I remember?" Rizzy's eyes narrowed. "You don't remember? Convenient." "Convenient for whom?" I asked, stepping closer. "She shows up here with no memory, no ID, and a torn playbill. Someone calls with a death threat 5 minutes later. That doesn't sound like convenience. That sounds like a conspiracy." Rizzy turned on me. "Stay out of this, Goodwin." "Sure," I said. "I'll just stay here in this office where I live while you barge in and shout at my employer's guest." Consider me practically invisible. Wolfe tapped the blotter once with his forefinger, a signal as clear as a pistol shot. The room quieted. "Lieutenant, you may retain your suspicions, but you will not dictate here. The woman is in distress. If she is indeed Marjorie Keene, then she is also a victim of violence or manipulation or both. Until her memory is restored and the threat to her safety addressed, she will remain." Rizzy bristled, then glanced at the woman again. For a moment I thought he'd argue. Instead he snapped the paper back into his jacket. "This isn't over, Wolfe. You're interfering in police business, as you will doubtless inform Inspector Kramer," Wolfe said, folding his hands. "Do extend my compliments." Rizzy left in a hurry, which suggested his blood pressure needed new plumbing. The front door slammed hard enough to disturb Fritz's saucepans. The silence after his exit felt heavy. Marjorie, or whoever she was, sat trembling, eyes wide. "He hates me," she murmured. "Why? What did I do?" "That," Wolfe said, "is precisely what we must discover." I filled in the silence. "So, congratulations, Miss Keene. You've graduated from anonymous blonde to star witness with amnesia. Not everyone gets promoted that fast." She gave a wan smile that cracked halfway. "But if I'm an actress, if I was on stage, why can't I remember the performance? The lines? Anything beyond flashes?" Wolfe closed his eyes, fingers steepled. Memory loss may be genuine or manufactured. Either way, its timing is significant. 2 nights ago, after a performance, you vanished. Now you arrive here, pursued, threatened, with only a fragment of a playbill. Clearly, someone engineered your condition, or exploited it. Engineered, she whispered. Drugs, trauma, manipulation, Wolfe said. Archie, we require information. Contact Saul Panzer. He is to investigate Miss Keene's background, colleagues, and recent engagements, particularly the production of The Golden Curtain. Names, roles, rivalries. Right, I said, standing. Shall I also audition for the next act? If you must indulge yourself, Wolfe said. Do so discreetly. Speak with the stage manager and leading men. One of them, I suspect, knows more about vanishing acts than they should. Marjorie looked at me, panic trembling in her eyes. Don't leave me alone. Please, you'll be safe here, I said. Wolfe's idea of excitement is a second helping of sweetbreads. If anyone can keep you breathing, it's him. Her shoulders sagged. All right. Just come back with answers. I gave her a nod, grabbed my coat and headed out. The city air hit me like a slap after the warmth of the brownstone. Amnesia, missing actresses, hostile cops. This case had more hooks than a bait shop. But Wolfe was right. The key lay in that theater, in the velvet shadows where actors bowed and rivals sharpened knives behind the curtains. If Marjorie Keene had forgotten her own name, someone had made damn sure of it. And by the time I tracked down the first suspect, I had the uneasy feeling I'd be wishing I could forget mine. Theater people wake up late, which makes them ideal company for a man like me, who prefers not to schedule his mornings around crowing roosters. Still, I didn't waste time. By 11:30, I was walking up Broadway toward the Golden Curtain Theater, a brick front relic wedged between a greasy diner and a pawn shop that had more brass horns in its window than an army band. The marquee still carried the show's name, letters peeling, as though even gravity had tired of the performance. Inside, the lobby smelled of stale popcorn and desperation. A bored ticket clerk sat behind glass, painting her nails a crimson shade better suited to evidence bags. I asked for the stage manager, and after a suspicious look that suggested she didn't believe I was here for art's sake, she jerked a thumb toward the side door. Backstage was another story altogether. Ropes dangling, flats leaning, the air rich with dust and grease paint. A man in his 40s, thin as a piano wire, barked orders at a kid lugging a prop suitcase. His tie was loosened, his collar sweat-stained, and his hair looked like it had been combed by electricity. "You're the stage manager?" I asked. "That depends," he said, not pausing in his scolding. "Who wants to know?" "Archie Goodwin. I'm doing some checking on Marjorie Keene." At her name, he froze. His eyes narrowed, then shifted nervously to the darkened stage. "She hasn't shown her face since Wednesday night. Whole company's in a panic. And now you come sniffing. Who sent you? Press?" "Private inquiry," I said. "Strictly confidential." "Let's call it a friend of the family." He barked a humorless laugh. "Family?" Marjorie never mentioned family. Just drama. Endless drama that was a lead-in if I'd ever heard one. "Meaning what?" He fidgeted with a clipboard. "She was brilliant, sure, when she wanted to be. But she liked attention, too much. Men followed her like puppies. Half the cast had eyes for her. That's the problem with actresses. They collect admirers like props. Names, I said, and pulled out my notebook. He rattled them off like a bitter accountant. Victor Harland, the leading man. Thought he owned her because he owned the spotlight. Then there's Celia Forrest, her understudy. Sweet face, but ambition sharp enough to cut rope. Oh, and Howard Bell, the producer. Moneybags with a temper. He didn't like Marjorie threatening to walk out last week. Said she was worth too much to the box office to play games. And don't forget Leonard Fitch, the playwright. He worshipped her, but she mocked him behind his back. I told her once that kind of poison spreads that made 4 suspects without breaking a sweat, and each came pre-packaged with motive. "What about Wednesday night?" I asked. She finished the show? She finished, he said, but she left in a hurry. No dressing room chatter, no autograph hounds, just grabbed her bag and bolted. I figured lovers spat. Then she never came back, and none of you called the cops? He shrugged. Theater people vanish for days. They drink, they pout, they scheme. We thought she'd turn up when she wanted applause again. I thanked him and strolled toward the dressing rooms where posters of past productions curled on the walls. The first door had Victor Harland, scrawled in black paint. I knocked, and a voice answered with more ego than invitation. He opened the door shirtless, muscles flexing like he was posing for a Greek statue contest. His hair gleamed with pomade, and his eyes carried the permanent shine of a man who liked mirrors too much. Autograph seekers use the front, he said. I'm not seeking autographs. Archie Goodwin, private investigator. The grin slipped. What about? Marjorie Keene. She's missing. His jaw tightened. So what? So she co-starred with you. Unless you rehearse with ghosts, you might have noticed her absence. He stepped back, motioning me inside. The room smelled of cologne thick enough to stun an elephant. Look, I cared for Marjorie. Sure. We had chemistry. But she liked to tease. One night she promised me everything. Next night she'd laugh in my face. That kind of woman keeps a man off balance. Off balance enough to disappear her? His eyes blazed. Are you accusing me? I'm just asking why you're sweating more than the stage lights. He pointed a finger. Talk to Celia Forrest. She hated Marjorie, wanted her role, probably got tired of waiting. That was the second referral I'd had toward the understudy, which meant Celia's ambition wasn't a backstage rumor. It was headline material. I left Victor flexing in his mirror and found Celia's dressing room. She opened the door cautiously, eyes red-rimmed, a script clutched like a lifeline. I'm not giving interviews, she said softly. Good. I'm not giving one either. I'm here about Marjorie. Her face clouded. They all think I wanted her gone. But I didn't. Yes, I wanted her part, I admit it. I dreamed of it. But Marjorie was complicated, sometimes cruel, sometimes kind. She told me once I'd never make it, that I lacked presence, but she also lent me a pair of earrings when I couldn't afford my own. How do you hate someone like that? You tell me, I said. Wednesday night. Did you see her leave? She shook her head. No. I was on stage during curtain calls. By the time I reached backstage, her room was empty, just her perfume lingering. Any idea who she was with? She hesitated, biting her lip. She argued with Howard Bell earlier that evening. He said if she kept threatening to quit, he'd ruin her. She laughed, but it wasn't funny. I thanked her and moved on to Bell, the producer, whose office reeked of cigars and desperation. He sat behind a desk piled high with contracts, chewing the stub of a cigar as if it owed him money. Keen? He barked when I asked. A menace, gorgeous, talented, but impossible. Always demanding more pay, more attention, more everything. I told her she walked out. I'd blackball her from every stage in the city. That kind of woman needs a firm hand. And when she vanished, he spread his hands. I assumed she was staging another stunt. Publicity, trick. I didn't think she was truly gone. Any threats? I asked. Only mine, he admitted with a grunt. But threats don't pay the rent. I needed her. She filled the house. Last on the list was Leonard Fitch, the playwright. I found him pacing the stage, muttering lines under his breath. He was pale, bespectacled, with ink stains on his cuffs. Mr. Fitch, I called. He started, blinking at me as if I'd broken his dream. Yes? Who are you? Goodwin, investigating Marjorie Keene's disappearance. His expression collapsed. Marjorie. She was my muse. My words lived only when she spoke them. Without her, the play dies. She laughed at me. Yes, mocked my devotion. But I didn't care. I'd have done anything for her, even kill. He looked horrified. No, never. She was light itself. Whoever hurt her, they've extinguished me. It was too poetic to trust, but grief can wear many costumes. By the time I left the theater, I had 4 suspects, 4 motives, and a gnawing sense that Marjorie Keene hadn't merely misplaced her memory. Someone had trimmed it with surgical precision. Each suspect had something to gain from her silence: fame, fortune, revenge, or freedom. And if Wolfe was right, the one who cut the curtain wanted her forgotten permanently. I don't usually let theater folk rattle me, but by the time I stepped back onto Broadway, I felt like I'd walked through 4 different rehearsals of the same play, each actor delivering his or her lines with a different motive hidden under the grease paint. If Wolfe had been there, he'd already be jotting notes on a yellow pad, assigning categories: anger, jealousy, greed, obsession. My job was to take the raw noise and carry it back to the brownstone in a form Wolfe could dissect without indigestion. Still, I wasn't ready to hand it over yet. The contradictions were too tempting to leave unpoked. Each suspect had supplied me with another name to chase, and when suspects start pointing fingers in unison, you know you've landed in a tangle worth combing. I started with a return to Victor Harland, the Greek statue with a temper. He'd bragged about chemistry with Marjorie, but Celia had painted her as cruel, laughing in men's faces. That sounded less like romance and more like rehearsal for a courtroom drama. I waited until he emerged from the stage door, coat collar up, and caught him before he hailed a cab. "Victor," I said pleasantly, "tell me something. If Marjorie was so hot for you, why was she threatening to quit the show and leave you solo in the spotlight?" He sneered. "You don't understand theater." "She threatened walkouts every week. It was her way of wringing concessions." "Producer said she pulled that on him too," I reminded, but he claimed she laughed in his face. "Same as you. If she laughed at both of you, maybe the applause you imagined wasn't for you after all." That got me a flash of teeth, not the smiling kind. "I don't care what she said. She wanted me. Everyone knew it." "Funny," I said. "Because from where I'm standing, everyone thought she belonged to someone else. And a man who believes the opposite is liable to make mistakes." He shoved past me into the cab without answering. It wasn't evidence, but it was sweat on the brow. Next up was Celia. I found her at the same dingy diner next door, hunched over coffee like it might pay her rent. I slid into the booth opposite. She startled, then frowned. "You again?" "Me again. Look, you say you didn't hate her, but Victor claims otherwise, and Belle thinks you'd kill for the part." Her eyes flashed. "Victor thinks every woman worships him, and Belle would sell his own mother for ticket sales. Yes, I wanted her role, but that doesn't mean I harmed her. Don't you see? If she's gone, suspicion falls on me first. That's hardly an advantage." It made sense, though ambition rarely calculates consequences until after the curtain falls. "What about Leonard Fitch?" I asked. "He said she mocked him." "That's not Muse behavior." She leaned forward. Leonard adored her. If she sneezed, he'd have written a sonnet about it. She toyed with him, yes, but he would never hurt her. He barely survives without her attention. Her tone carried pity, not defense. I filed it away and paid for the coffee before she could protest. Howard Bell, the producer, was my third stop. His office smelled worse the second time around, the ashtray now a mountain range. He scowled when he saw me. "Didn't get enough the first time, Goodwin." "Call me greedy," I said. "You told me she was impossible, but Celia says you threatened to ruin her career outright. Which is it, empty bluster or actual blackmail?" He growled. "Both. She was the draw. I needed her, but she needed me too. Without my backing, she'd be nothing but a chorus girl again. She knew it, maybe," I said, "unless she had another patron in her corner. Like Fitch Bell's laugh was smoke and bitterness. Fitch, He's a scribbler who lives on advances. He couldn't protect a pigeon. She used him for praise and discarded him like last season's costumes. I left him there, chewing on his cigar, and sought Fitch for a second round. The playwright was still pacing the stage like Hamlet with writer's block. "Mr. Fitch," I called, "your colleagues paint you as devoted, but powerless. Which is it?" He stopped, wringing his ink-stained hands. Both, perhaps. Yes, I adored her. Yes, she ridiculed me. But don't you understand? Her cruelty was part of her radiance. She drew men like moths, and we burned willingly. Even if she was planning to walk out of your play. His face fell. She said that? She couldn't. Without her, the play is ashes. No one else could give life to my words. Celia might disagree, I said. He shook his head violently. Celia is a shadow. Marjorie was the sun. It was devotion bordering on madness, and madness makes fertile ground for crime. By the time I stepped outside again, dusk was settling. The neon signs sputtered to life, each one buzzing like a fly in the city's ear. I'd collected contradictions. Victor saw her as his conquest. Celia claimed reluctant admiration. Bell painted her as greedy and ungrateful. Fitch declared her indispensable. Together they made a picture. Marjorie Keene was the center of a web, and every strand led to resentment, longing, or power. I carried that bundle of motives back to the brownstone, where Wolfe was sampling Fritz's liver pâté and sipping beer like a man who'd conquered Rome before lunch. He opened one eye as I entered. Well, I gave him the rundown, name by name, trimming the frills but keeping the contradictions. Wolfe listened, motionless, until I finished. Then he expelled a sigh like a furnace settling. Pfui, a tangle of human vanity. Predictable. Each of them had motive. All useless without means and opportunity. Did any confess to seeing her after curtain? None admitted it. Stage manager said she bolted. Everyone else claims ignorance. Wolfe grunted. Then someone lies. And someone ensured her memory was purged. The instrument, drug, shock, or suggestion, must be discovered. Until then, we sift words. Marjorie entered from the hall, pale but steadier than before. You found them? My colleagues. I found them, I said. They all think highly of you, in their own murderous ways. She shivered. I can't remember them. Faces blur, voices fade. Only one thing is clear. I heard a man whisper backstage that night, just before everything went dark. He said, "Without her, the curtain falls on all of us." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Archie, there is our key. Find who uttered those words, and we find who benefits most from her silence. I nodded, though I had a hunch the words weren't a clue. They were a death sentence rehearsed for an encore. And somewhere among those 4 suspects, one had already taken their bull. The first sign that something was off came just after dinner. Fritz had outdone himself with a veal ragout that could have made the Pope reconsider fasting, and Wolfe was settling into his beer with the satisfied rumble of a man who had survived another day without lifting anything heavier than a fork. Marjorie was calmer than I'd seen her, nibbling cautiously as though the memory of food itself might slip away if she chewed too quickly. I'd just begun stacking plates when she excused herself to fetch her handbag from the office. The scream followed 30 seconds later. I was through the door in 2 strides, hand on my pocket piece, but no gun was needed. Marjorie stood frozen near Wolfe's desk, the handbag dangling limp in her grip. On the blotter lay a single folded sheet of paper that hadn't been there before. Wolfe frowned at the intrusion as though the desk itself had betrayed him. "What is it?" I asked, crossing to her. She extended the paper like it might burn her. I took it and unfolded carefully. The message was brief, typed in block letters, the kind that make your skin itch because someone went to the trouble of concealing every stroke. The curtain falls. Stay silent. I whistled low. Well, that's subtle. Someone's been trespassing in our home theater. Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits. Archie, lock the doors. Then call Fritz. I secured the doors while Fritz appeared, more insulted than afraid. He swore in Swiss German that no one could have entered without his hearing it. Wolfe questioned him with slow precision. Had he left the kitchen? Any deliveries? Any windows ajar? Fritz swore no, yet the note had appeared. It means one of two things, Wolfe said grimly, holding the note with the thumb and forefinger. Either our vigilance is inadequate, or our adversary has assistance. Or, I said, someone inside the house put it there. Marjorie gasped. You think I... Easy, I said. If you planted threatening notes in handbags, you'd remember your name by now. Which leaves outsiders with keys or nerves of steel, Wolfe drummed his fingers. Archie, fetch Saul Panzer. We require surveillance. Tonight I phoned Saul, who took the job with his usual calm. By the time he arrived, the brownstone had the atmosphere of a locked theater during intermission, silence heavy with expectation. Saul inspected doors, windows, and even Fritz's pantry, then stationed himself near the rear with eyes sharper than a searchlight. Marjorie sat stiff in the office, hands clenched around that torn playbill corner like it was her last tether to sanity. Why won't they let me go? She whispered. Why keep me alive just to frighten me? Because, Wolfe said, your silence is valuable, but your death premature. Alive, you confuse. Dead, you accuse. Someone fears the latter. She shivered, and I pulled a chair closer. Look, Miss Keene, whoever wrote that note is banking on you staying rattled. The moment you remember something useful, their little production closes early. So try harder. She pressed her fingers to her temples, eyes screwed shut. I see light. Applause. Faces blurred. But one thing stands clear. A bottle, green glass, backstage. Someone offered me a drink. I took it. Then... Nothing, Wolfe leaned forward. What sort of bottle? Small? She said faintly. Like medicine. Bitter taste. Wolfe shot me a glance. Drugged. Predictable. Someone ensured amnesia deliberately, that changed things from accident to design. Just then, Saul appeared in the doorway, silent as a shadow. He held something small in his hand. Found this wedged in the back gate. Paper scrap, likely dropped. He passed it to me. It was part of a torn program from the Golden Curtain, with a scrawled note in pencil. Meet after Act 2. Don't let her know. I showed Wolfe. His brow furrowed. Act 2, a rendezvous. Clearly Our Lady was deceived into meeting someone. Archie, tomorrow you will learn who was absent after that act. Cast or crew. Marjorie buried her face in her hands. I trusted someone. And they poisoned me. I put a hand on her shoulder, more to steady her than comfort. We'll figure out who. They left enough crumbs to choke on the night dragged heavy. Saul stayed till dawn, reporting no intrusions, but the weight of that note on Wolfe's desk lingered like the smell of Fritz's onions. By morning, Wolfe was in his chair, eyes half shut, digesting clues instead of food. Archie, he said finally, we have proof of deliberate trespass and proof of deliberate drugging. Both acts required access, opportunity, and intent. Each suspect qualifies. But the trespass is key. It demonstrates audacity. Who among them has both the arrogance and the desperation to intrude here? Harland, I said. Big ego, small brain. Or Bell, he thinks he owns the whole city. Fitch, Wolfe murmured. He worships, therefore he presumes. And Celia, ambition blinds judgment. All possible. We must probe further. That was Wolfe's way of saying I'd be pounding more pavement while he sat cultivating thought like orchids. I didn't argue. The note had shifted the case from curiosity to danger, and the next move was ours. Marjorie sat quietly, but I noticed her eyes drifting to the desk again, to that note typed in soulless black. The fear in her face wasn't only for herself. It was the dawning realization that someone she once trusted had orchestrated the whole act. And as I looked at her, I realized something else. Whoever slipped that note into Wolfe's office hadn't just trespassed. They'd taunted us, dared us to follow the trail, which meant the game had moved on to Wolfe's stage now, and when the curtain fell this time, it wouldn't be on him. By the time the sun slid its way into the brownstone, Wolfe had gone full sphinx. He sat in his chair, lips pressed so tight you could have balanced a ruler on them, staring at that typed note as if sheer willpower would make the sender's fingerprints blossom across the page. Fritz tiptoed around with breakfast. Saul reported in with nothing to show for a sleepless night, and Marjorie Keene looked like she'd spent 12 hours on stage under interrogation lights instead of under Wolfe's roof. I poured my coffee and tried to sound casual. "So, boss, we've got a woman poisoned backstage, a note delivered under our noses, and 4 suspects with enough motive to fuel a season of Shakespeare. How do you want to play it?" "By compelling the adversary to reveal himself," Wolfe said. His eyes didn't move from the paper. "We must increase pressure, meaning me pounding pavement till I wear out my soles," I said. "Precisely." He wanted facts, contradictions, slivers of opportunity. And since the bottle Marjorie described had green glass and bitterness in equal measure, I started my day with pharmacies. By noon, I'd learned that the only people still using bitter tonics were hypochondriacs and actresses trying to calm stage jitters. None of the druggists remembered Marjorie, but one clerk recalled a man in a hurry buying a small vial of scopolamine, the kind of chemical that erases memory faster than critics erase a playwright's career. The name he gave was Howard Bell, producer, our cigar-chewing tyrant. I carried that nugget back to Wolfe, who raised a single eyebrow and muttered, "So? Bell is careless." Then he sank into silence again, letting the air fill with the sound of his brain doing push-ups. By mid-afternoon, Saul returned with news. He'd followed Celia Forrest after rehearsal. She hadn't gone home to her boarding house as claimed. Instead, she'd met Victor Harland at a corner cafe. They'd talked in low tones, heads close together, until Victor shoved something across the table. Saul couldn't catch what it was, but Celia pocketed it and left in a hurry. I relayed this to Wolfe, who grunted. Collusion. Or blackmail. Either way, pressure mounts. Marjorie listened from the sofa, hands tight around her teacup. "They're all conspiring against me," she whispered. "Not all," Wolfe corrected, "but enough to indicate panic. When adversaries scramble, they betray themselves." That evening, another move hit the board. Inspector Kramer stormed in, red-faced and short of patience. He waved his cigar like a bayonet. "Wolfe, what the devil are you pulling?" "Lieutenant Rizzi reports you're hiding Marjorie Keene here while we're investigating a possible homicide." "Homicide?" I asked. Kramer glared. "Yes, Goodwin. The stagehand at the Golden Curtain. Frankie Mott turned up dead this morning. Strangled backstage. Sometime after rehearsal last night, Marjorie gasped. Her teacup shattered on the rug. Frankie, he helped with props." "Oh, God." Wolfe's face darkened. "And you think Miss Keene responsible?" Kramer stabbed the air. "I think she's tied to this mess, and you're obstructing." "She is the victim," Wolfe said coldly. "Drugged, threatened, pursued. And now others die. Your Lieutenant Rizzi seeks the wrong quarry." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "If you've got proof, produce it. Otherwise, you're complicit." "Proof requires time," Wolfe replied, "and your interference wastes it. Leave her here. Archie will share our findings when ready." I expected an explosion, but Wolfe's voice carried the kind of steel even Kramer hated to challenge. He growled, puffed, and stormed out, muttering that if Wolfe played him false, he'd nail us both to the wall. The room sank into tense silence. Wolfe finally exhaled and turned to me. "Archie, the adversary has killed once. To secure silence. He will kill again. Our task is urgent. We must separate the braggarts from the desperate." "How?" I asked. "By baiting them." He outlined the plan with surgical precision. Tomorrow night we'd stage a small gathering at the brownstone, Marjorie present but under watch. We'd let slip that her memory had returned in fragments, enough to identify someone. If the adversary believed discovery imminent, he'd be forced to act. Marjorie flinched at the idea. "You want to use me as bait?" "You already are," Wolfe said. "Better to acknowledge it." I didn't like it, but he was right. Someone had slipped past our defenses once. They'd try again if provoked, and this time Wolfe intended to catch them. The next day crawled by with the weight of anticipation. Saul stationed himself discreetly. Fritz locked every door twice. Wolfe issued instructions like a general laying siege. When evening came, we gathered in the office. Wolfe in his chair, Marjorie pale but resolute, me hovering near the door with one hand in my jacket. At 9 o'clock sharp, the phone rang. Wolfe motioned for me to answer. A distorted voice hissed, "She remembers." "Then she dies tonight." Click. I replaced the receiver slowly. That sounded like our cue. Wolfe's eyes glimmered. Indeed. An hour passed in taut silence. Then, faintly, a creak from the rear hall. Saul appeared in the doorway, gesturing sharply. Someone was inside. I slipped into the hall with him. The brownstone was dark except for the glow from the office. At the end of the corridor, a shadow moved. Someone crouched near the rear door as if checking an exit strategy. We advanced quietly. The figure turned and moonlight caught the face. Leonard Fitch, the playwright. His eyes were wild, his hands clutching something, a small green glass bottle. "Mr. Fitch," I said evenly, "the show's over." He bolted. Saul grabbed him before he reached the door, wrestling him down with efficiency. I pried the bottle from his hand. It reeked of chemicals. We hauled him into the office. Marjorie recoiled, gasping. Fitch thrashed, spitting words. "She ruined everything. Mocked me, scorned me, then threatened to leave. Without her, my play dies. Better she forget than betray me. Better silence than laughter." Wolfe regarded him with disgust. "You drugged her memory to preserve your illusion. And when that failed, you killed the stagehand who suspected. Pathetic." Fitch sagged, the fight draining out. Saul secured him until the police could be summoned. Marjorie wept quietly, the truth cutting deeper than the lies had. Wolfe closed his eyes, face weary but resolute. Human vanity, Archie. It creates plays, destroys lives, and compels fools to commit murder. The curtain has fallen. On him I phoned Kramer, who arrived with more curses than patience. He took Fitch into custody, this time without glaring at Wolfe too hard. Evidence spoke louder than tempers. When the door finally closed on the commotion, the brownstone fell quiet again. Wolfe lifted his glass of beer, took a slow sip, and muttered, "At last." And though Marjorie's memory was still fractured, one truth remained. She'd been spared the final act, because Wolfe had rewritten the script. The brownstone hadn't cooled from the echo of Kramer's curses before Wolfe closed his eyes and let his head sink back against the chair. Fritz had retreated to salvage what remained of supper. Saul had slipped away with the quiet efficiency of a man clocking out, and Marjorie sat curled in the red leather chair like a child clinging to the last act of a nightmare. The playwright, Leonard Fitch, was in custody. His rant about muse and mockery still ringing in my ears, but if you think that meant Wolfe considered the curtain dropped, you don't know Nero Wolfe. "Archie," he said at last, his tone carrying the weight of deliberation. Our adversary has been identified, but the production is not concluded. I raised an eyebrow. You mean Fitch isn't the finale? He is the perpetrator of violence, certainly. But he is not alone in culpability. The stagehand's death, the trespass here, the persistent threat. These were not the efforts of a man wholly isolated. Fitch lacks the constitution for such audacity. He was enabled by who? Harland with the biceps, Bell with the bankroll, or Celia with ambition sharp enough to cut rope? Precisely the question, Wolfe said, sipping his beer. And to answer it, we must position our pieces carefully. You will return to the theatre, inquire further into Bell's purchase of scopolamine, establish the precise circumstances of Harland's romantic delusions, and probe Celia's acceptance of something from Harland, as Saul observed. I whistled. That's 3 errands before lunch. You sure you're not trying to slim me down? Archie. That one word carried enough ballast to sink a ship, so I left it there. The next morning, I started with Howard Bell. His office smelled like stale cigars and financial panic. He was dictating something to a secretary who looked like she'd rather be auditioning anywhere else. When he saw me, he growled, "Back again?" "You vultures never leave save it," I said. "I've got a clerk who swears you bought scopolamine." "That's a memory-wiping drug, not a cough syrup." "Care to explain?" Bell slammed his fist on the desk. "Damn lies." "Yes, I bought it. Doctor recommended a sedative for nerves. I didn't care what it was called. This business kills men quicker than bullets." But I never gave it to Marjorie. "That's convenient," I said. "She remembers someone handing her a green bottle backstage. You want me to believe coincidence?" "I don't give a damn what you believe," he snapped. "I needed her alive, on stage, drawing crowds. If Fitch poisoned her, it's because he couldn't stand sharing her." The man was half mad with devotion. His argument held water, murky, maybe poisoned, but not punctured yet. I left him chewing cigars and headed for Celia. She was rehearsing alone on stage, voice echoing through the empty house. When she spotted me, she froze, then set down the script. "I told you everything," she said quickly. "Not quite," I said. "Saul Panzer saw you meet Harland. He passed you something. Care to tell me what?" Her cheeks flushed. "It wasn't sinister. He gave me money. I'd lent him some and he repaid it." "Money's not usually shoved across a cafe table like contraband," I said. Tears welled up. He was afraid someone would see. "People talk. They think we're together." "We're not, then why the secrecy?" She bit her lip. "Because Marjorie accused me once of chasing him. She said if I touched him, she'd destroy me. I didn't want gossip proving her right. Her fear seemed genuine, but theater people could cry on cue. I left her trembling and went for Harland. He greeted me bare-chested again, like modesty was beneath his contract. "Back for another autograph, Goodwin?" "Not quite. I'm here about Celia. You've been paying her off." "Why?" His grin faltered. "That's none of your business. It is if it ties into Marjorie's disappearance and Fitch's breakdown. Did she know something? Did she catch you slipping the bottle?" His eyes blazed. "No. I never hurt Marjorie. She belonged to me." I leaned closer. "She belonged to herself, pal. And from what I hear, she laughed at you more than once. Maybe that stung enough to make you hand Fitch a little something to even the score." He shoved me back, fists tight. "They didn't touch her." Fitch was insane, Bell was desperate, and Celia was jealous. But me. I loved her. I left before his reflection distracted him again. By the time I trudged back to the brownstone, I had more contradictions than clarity. Wolfe listened in silence, eyes closed, fingers steepled. When I finished, he let out a sound halfway between a grunt and a sigh. "Bell denies, but his purchase is verified." Celia deflects, but her fear may be genuine. Harland professes love, which in his parlance means possession. Each holds a fragment of guilt. Fitch was the blade, but one of them sharpened it. Marjorie, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke. "Wait, you said sharpened. That night before I drank, I heard someone say, 'Don't let her sharpen the knife.' I thought it was nonsense, but maybe it wasn't." Wolfe's eyes opened slowly. "Indeed." Another piece. "Archie, our adversaries conspired more intricately than I first judged. Fitch acted, but someone else ensured his act. The circle tightens. I leaned against the desk. So what's next? Another baited trap." "Not yet," Wolfe said. "First, we prepare the stage. Tomorrow evening we shall invite them here. All of them. I will not sift crumbs in alleys. They will present themselves, and under examination, their guilt will betray them." I couldn't help but grin. "The office gathering." Curtain up, Wolfe shut his eyes again. "Indeed. And this time, Archie, it is we who direct the play." The room settled into silence, heavy with anticipation. Marjorie clasped her hands, trembling but resolute. Outside, the city roared its endless chorus, unaware that within one brownstone the final act was already being rehearsed. And if Wolfe had his way, the truth would be dragged into the spotlight, squirming under his intellect, until the guilty dropped their masks. If you've never seen Nero Wolfe host an evening gathering, imagine a heavyweight boxer who never leaves his stool but still manages to dominate the ring. By 7 o'clock, the office was arranged like a stage set. Wolfe in his throne behind the desk, Fritz hovering discreetly with trays of sandwiches and bottles of beer, and me playing usher, making sure our cast of suspects showed up without wandering off into the wrong acts. Marjorie Keene sat close to Wolfe, pale but composed, her memory still fogged, but her presence deliberately central. Wolfe wanted her there as a silent pressure point, and Wolfe always gets his way. Howard Bell arrived first, carrying his cigar stink like a personal banner. He barked something about wasting his time, but when Wolfe gestured him to a chair, he sat. Victor Harland showed up next, a dazzling grin firmly in place, though his eyes darted toward Marjorie with a hunger that didn't do his case any favors. Celia Forrest slipped in soon after, posture stiff, eyes flashing suspicion. And finally, Leonard Fitch, already in custody but released on Wolfe's insistence that the gathering was essential, was delivered by a reluctant Kramer who muttered enough curses to fill a dictionary. Kramer planted himself in a corner, arms folded, and said, "If this blows up, Wolfe, it's your funeral." Wolfe barely inclined his head. "I never attend funerals, Inspector." "They are wasteful of time that set the room's temperature. Frost with a chance of fire." Wolfe let the silence stretch until even Harland's smile wilted. Then he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we are here because your colleague, Miss Keene, suffered deliberate injury. Her memory impaired by drugging. A stagehand was killed. Threats have been delivered. One of you bears responsibility. Tonight, we shall determine which bell barked a laugh." "You think you can sit there and pronounce guilt? I run shows, Wolfe. I know when someone's hamming it up." "This is nonsense." "Silence," Wolfe said, so quietly it cut sharper than any shout. "You will each be heard." Archie. That was my cue. I recited the findings like a stage narrator. Bell's purchase of scopolamine, Celia's secret meeting with Harland, Harland's obsession, Fitch's broken devotion. Each revelation drew gasps or glares. Marjorie flinched when I described the bottle. Fitch moaned when I repeated his own rant about silence. Wolfe let the reactions simmer, then focused on Bell. "Mr. Bell, why did you purchase scopolamine?" Bell squirmed, chewing his cigar down to pulp. "Doctor told me to calm my nerves. That's all. Yet Miss Keene recalls drinking from a green bottle backstage, bitter in taste. You deny involvement?" "I deny it," Bell snapped. "She was my star." "Poison her. That's suicide." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured. He shifted his gaze to Celia. "Miss Forrest, you received something from Mr. Harland at a cafe." Explain. Her cheeks burned. "Money. I'd lent him some." He was embarrassed. Wolfe arched a brow. Embarrassment rarely dictates secrecy unless the exchange masks more. "Did you conspire against Miss Keene?" "No," she burst out. "I admired her. Yes, I wanted her part, but not like that. I could never—" Harland cut her off with a laugh. "She's lying. She hated Marjorie. Everyone knew it." Celia whirled on him. "And you didn't? You loved her so much you couldn't stand her laughing at you." The room erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Kramer cursed, ready to shut it down. Wolfe merely raised a finger, and silence dropped like a curtain. "Enough," Wolfe said. "Mr. Harland, you claimed devotion, yet devotion, in your terms, meant possession. Did you slip her the bottle?" He bristled. "No, I'd never harm her. She was mine." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "She was not yours. She was herself. And you are a braggart." Harland's face reddened, but he stayed put. Wolfe finally turned to Fitch, who sat trembling, eyes darting. "You, sir, confessed to drugging her to preserve your illusion, but you lacked the means alone. Someone procured the drug, someone emboldened you, someone ensured access to this house for the note. Who?" Fitch shook his head violently. "No one. It was me. All me." Wolfe's lips curved faintly. "False. Your desperation makes you noble in your own mind. But nobility does not trespass here with typed threats. That requires calculation. You are not a calculator. You had help." The silence deepened. All eyes shifted, suspicion ricocheting like bullets. Bell puffed, Celia paled, Harland clenched fists. Then Wolfe spoke again. Voice iron. "Miss Keene remembers a phrase, 'Don't let her sharpen the knife.' Spoken backstage. That phrase came from one who feared she might arm herself with truth, who feared exposure. That voice was not Fitch's. It was yours, Mr. Bell." Bell lurched to his feet. "That's a damn lie." "Sit," Wolfe commanded. And somehow Bell sat. "You purchased the drug. You threatened her career. You feared her departure would bankrupt you. So you enlisted Fitch, feeding his devotion, convincing him that drugging her was salvation. You used his hands, his madness, while you retained deniability. But the trespass here, the note, was your own. You sought to frighten her back into silence when memory threatened to return, and when Frankie Mott, the stagehand, grew suspicious. You killed him." Bell's face turned purple. "You can't prove—" "Archie," Wolfe said. "The bottle." I placed the green glass vial Saul had pried from Fitch's hand on the desk. Wolfe gestured toward the label, faint but legible. "Property of Bell Laboratories," he intoned. "Your name upon your instrument." Careless, Mr. Bell Kramer stepped forward, eyes blazing. "That's enough for me." He clamped a hand on Bell's shoulder. "You're coming downtown." Bell thrashed, shouting denials. But it was useless. The weight of Wolfe's logic had already crushed him. Harland muttered in shock. Celia sobbed. Fitch buried his face in trembling hands. As Kramer hauled Bell out, Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. At last, the audience departs. The room emptied slowly, Harland and Celia in silence, Fitch escorted by police. Marjorie remained, tears glistening, but her voice steadier. "You saved me." "But how did you know it was him?" Wolfe opened his eyes briefly. "Because only Bell combined greed with audacity. The others were petty, vain, foolish. He was desperate. Desperation writes notes." She bowed her head, words failing. Wolfe closed his eyes again, signaling the evening was concluded. I escorted her upstairs, then returned to the office. Wolfe was sipping beer, satisfied in the way only a man who's bent the world back into order can be. He muttered, "Human folly, Archie." "It writes plays more tragic than any pen," I nodded. The curtain had fallen at last, but in Wolfe's theatre, the show never truly ends. After Kramer marched Belle out of the brownstone, the silence that remained wasn't the kind you'd call peaceful. It had an aftertaste, bitter as the scopolamine Wolfe said had stolen Marjorie's memory. Fritz gathered plates that no one had touched, muttering in Swiss German about wasted food. Marjorie sat in the red leather chair with her hands clasped so tightly I wondered if she meant to fuse them. And Wolfe leaned back in his chair with his eyes half closed, the mountain at rest after an avalanche. I broke the quiet first. "So Belle's our man. Case closed. Except you don't look like a man celebrating a victory lap." "Because," Wolfe murmured, "Belle was the principal actor, but not the sole architect." He had neither the subtlety to arrange the trespass here nor the patience to orchestrate Fitch's frenzy. He was clumsy, impulsive. Someone steadier applied the pressure that bent Fitch into his tool. I sat on the corner of the desk. "So we're still missing a partner. Care to share which one? Harland, who thinks possession is 9/10 of the law? Celia, who keeps crying ambition but pocketing payoffs? Or Fitch himself, who might have had enough lucidity left to manage a side plot?" Wolfe opened his eyes a sliver. "Fitch is a weakling. He would never confront me, never trespass here. Harland is vain, not clever. Miss Forrest, however—" That caught Marjorie's attention. She straightened, eyes wide. "Celia? But she was kind sometimes. She lent me things. She envied me, yes, but she wasn't cruel." "Envy is cruelty," Wolfe said softly. "And opportunity is temptation. She was nearest to you, ready to inherit your part, ready to step into your light. She was the ideal confederate for Belle, pliable, eager, fearful enough to obey, but ambitious enough to gain." I frowned. If she helped Belle, why didn't he drag her down with him? He had no trouble throwing everyone else under the bus. "Because," Wolfe said, "he thought her invisible. Ambition disguised as innocence is a potent mask. He intended her to carry on once Marjorie was erased. But her role was not to shine, it was to silence." Marjorie pressed a hand to her forehead. "I remember. She was in my dressing room just before the curtain. She said, 'Don't drink too much, it dulls the sparkle.' I thought she meant champagne. But it was the bottle, wasn't it?" Her voice broke, and the memory with it. I leaned toward Wolfe. "So you're saying Belle gave her the drug, Celia slipped it to Marjorie, and Fitch played the lovesick stooge who believed he was saving his muse?" Wolfe inclined his head. "Precisely. Each played a part in the performance, and each must be held to account. Belle for greed, Fitch for violence, and Miss Forrest for complicity." I let out a low whistle. "That'll make a nice encore for Kramer." He thought hauling Belle off was enough, but you're about to hand him the full cast list. "Not yet," Wolfe said. "I will summon them once more. Not tonight. Tomorrow. I will allow them one night to stew to betray themselves further. Then, Archie, the curtain will fall." It was late, but none of us slept much. Fritz prowled the kitchen. Marjorie tossed in the guest room. Wolfe sat in the office with his beer as immovable as stone. I lay awake in my room, replaying every look Celia had given me, every tremor in her voice. Had it been fear of suspicion or fear of discovery? Morning brought no comfort. The papers screamed Belle's arrest across their front pages, but there was nothing about Fitch or Celia. The theatre was in uproar, box office closed, critics already sharpening knives. By noon, Kramer was back on our doorstep, demanding why Wolfe hadn't told him Celia was in it too. "Because," Wolfe said, "I prefer to present conclusions, not speculations. Return tonight. Bring Forrest. Bring Fitch if you've retained him. And clear your calendar. Kramer sputtered but agreed. He'd learned that arguing with Wolfe only raised his blood pressure, not his clearance rate. By 8 o'clock the office was crowded again. Bell was absent, locked in a cell, but Celia and Fitch sat rigid as schoolchildren caught cheating. Harland was there too, protesting his innocence with every glance at Marjorie. Kramer loomed in the corner, arms folded, cigar clenched like a weapon. Marjorie stayed near Wolfe, trembling but resolute. Wolfe began with no preamble. Mr. Bell's arrest is sufficient for a charge of murder. Yet the matter of Miss Keene's drugging remains incomplete. The act required proximity. Mr. Bell lacked it. Mr. Fitch lacked cunning. But Miss Forrest, she had both proximity and ambition. She was in the dressing room. She handled the glass. Celia shot to her feet, face white. "That's a lie. I never—" Wolfe's voice boomed, cutting her down. "Silence. You aided him, whether willingly or through fear. You poured the draught, and when Miss Keene faltered, you looked away. Your tears are not grief, but guilt." Celia collapsed back into the chair, sobbing. Fitch groaned, covering his face. Harland cursed under his breath. Kramer barked, "So she was in on it too." "That's enough for conspiracy. Wolfe, if you've got proof—" Wolfe gestured toward Marjorie. "Her memory. Fragments only, but sufficient. She recalls Miss Forrest's presence, her words, her caution about the drink." A small thing, yet damning. Marjorie nodded slowly, voice shaking. "Yes, she was there." She pressed the glass into my hand. Celia broke then, collapsing into full confession, her words tumbling in gasps. Bell had pressed her, promised her the role if she cooperated. She'd slipped Marjorie the drink, terrified but tempted. Fitch had been the one to hover, to believe it was salvation. And when Frankie Mott stumbled close to the truth, Bell had strangled him to shut him up. It was ugly, but it was complete. Kramer looked like a man who'd swallowed a lemon whole. He muttered curses, signaled his men, and had Celia taken away with Fitch. Harland left in stunned silence, his dreams of conquest crumbling with the stage itself. When the last of them was gone, Wolfe leaned back and shut his eyes. "Archie, that concludes the penultimate act. Tomorrow we restore order." "Meaning what?" I asked. "Meaning," he said, "we close the curtain with reflection. Tonight has been theatre. Tomorrow is justice." And with that, he raised his glass of beer, dismissed us all, and left the silence heavy enough to smother the city itself. The brownstone always feels different the morning after a case closes, or nearly closes. Fritz insists on keeping the curtains wide, as if light alone can disinfect the air of what's passed through, and Wolfe sinks into his chair with the posture of a man reclaiming his kingdom. But this time, the air was heavier than usual. The phone calls from Kramer had been short and sour. Celia had broken entirely under questioning. Fitch had repeated his hysteria until even the stenographer pitied him, and Bell was preparing to trade cigars for prison dust. Harland had slunk back to the theatre, apparently convinced that survival was vindication. Marjorie Keene, though, was still here. She came into the office late in the morning, wearing a borrowed dress Fritz had found from some old trunk, and a look that carried more years than her age should have allowed. She sat across from Wolfe, clasped her hands, and waited like a supplicant before a priest. "I can't thank you enough," she began softly. "You need not," Wolfe replied, his voice firm but not unkind. "Gratitude is wasted. You are alive. That suffices." She smiled faintly, then turned to me. "But what now? My memory comes in fragments, pieces that cut when I try to fit them together. How do I go back to the stage, knowing what was done?" I shrugged. "Actors are good at turning scars into performances. You'll manage. And if you can't, there's always radio. People can't poison applause they can't see. That drew a shaky laugh. Wolfe opened his eyes fully then, fixing her with the weight of his gaze. Miss Keene, you must understand. Your craft invites both admiration and envy. You did not err by shining. Others erred by coveting your light. Do not let their depravity extinguish what is yours. She nodded slowly, absorbing it like a line she'd need to rehearse until it lived in her bones. After she left to rest, I lingered in the office, expecting Wolfe to close his eyes and drift into his usual post-case hibernation. Instead, he gestured toward the note that still lay on the desk. The curtain falls. Stay silent. That, Archie, he said, is the most damning artifact of the affair. It demonstrates the futility of menace. They believed fear could achieve what truth would not. They were wrong. I leaned back in my chair. Sure, but it nearly worked. If she hadn't stumbled here, if that playbill hadn't led her to our door, she might still be wandering half dead in some alley. Chance, Wolfe admitted. Fate, if you prefer. But once here, inevitability followed. Truth asserts itself, however men endeavor to suppress it. I grinned. You should print that on a poster. Truth asserts itself. Ask Nero Wolfe, he groaned. Spare me your flippancies. This was an ugly business, not merely murder, petty ambition allied with greed, devotion twisted to violence. The stage is a mirror of life, Archie, and this time it reflected corruption unadorned. There was a knock at the door. Fritz appeared with lunch, cold chicken, bread, and a beer for Wolfe. He set it down with the quiet dignity of a man who considers nourishment the only real justice. Wolfe began eating, and I knew conversation was done until the plate was clean. By late afternoon, Marjorie had packed the few things she carried. She stood in the hall, a suitcase Fritz had scrounged at her feet. Her face was steadier now, though the edges still trembled. I'll send word when I know what's next, she told me. And I'll remember this place, even if the rest still comes and goes. Do that, I said. And next time someone hands you a green bottle, tell them to drink it first. She managed a real laugh at that. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. I returned to the office. Wolfe had his book open, one finger holding his place while he stared at the orchids Fritz had brought in from upstairs. He didn't look up when I came in. So, I said, case closed, curtains drawn, villains hauled off stage. All neat. What's your final word on it? Wolfe shut the book, placed it on the desk, and fixed me with the gaze that makes philosophers look like amateurs. That men and women, Archie, are ever tempted to trade integrity for gain. Bell sought wealth, Forrest sought position, Fitch sought devotion. In their pursuit, they betrayed decency and destroyed themselves. Miss Keene was nearly their victim, but she survived because she sought nothing, only to perform. That is the difference. He lifted his glass of beer, raised it slightly as if in toast, and drank. Justice, Archie, is not always swift, but it is inexorable, and it is mine to reveal. I leaned back, folded my arms, and said, and here I thought it was Kramer's job. Pfui, Wolfe muttered, closing his eyes. The house settled into its familiar rhythm again. The orchids upstairs, Fritz in the kitchen, Wolfe immovable in his chair. The storm had passed, the curtain had fallen, and life at the brownstone returned to its peculiar version of calm. And as usual, I ended up with the last line, because Wolfe never cares to. The actress forgot her name, I said to no one in particular, but she'll never forget Nero Wolfe.